Hello everyone! Today I'm going to show you how to configure DKIM, SPF and DMARC records for your email service for your domain. These three records or services or technologies improve the deliverability of your email and also protects your domain and your email from impersonation, spoofing, and so on. It's very important to have these records set for your domain, because otherwise some email services may start putting your emails to spam, to quarantine, or reject those messages completely. For example, Yahoo and Gmail announced that they will start requiring these technologies for incoming emails. In the first wave, it will be for mass emails, but later on, it will be enforced for all emails. So it's very important to be prepared and protect your email. First, let's start with SPF. SPF is generated automatically for you when you enable Exchange Online or Exchange Online protection in your tenant. And this guide, by the way, will be focused on Office 365 services and Exchange Online specifically, but it works for any email provider. So even if you use a third-party email provider, the general recommendations are the same. And I will also add some comments about how to do it if you use a different, or how it works for different providers. But let's focus on Exchange Online for now. SPF for Exchange Online is automatically generated when you enable Exchange Online or Exchange Online protection. It's part of this first box in the admin center, Microsoft 365 admin center. And this is the SPF record. As you can see, it was automatically generated for me. SPF record is a TXT type of DNS record, and the value needs to be like this. SPF1 is always the same. It defines the version of SPF, and it's always SPF1. There is no other version at the moment available. So no matter what email service provider you use, it will always be SPF1. It's mandatory. Then you define the actual mail servers, or in general servers or IP addresses or domain names that are used to send emails from your domain. In this case, it's SPF protection outlook.com. This is all you need if you use, or if you send actually emails only from Office 365. Behind this domain name, there are all IP addresses of all email servers that are used in Office 365 to send emails. If you have some other email servers or other IP addresses that you send emails from, it's important to include it also in this SPF record. This all, at the end, defines what happens with the rest of the emails. So what policy should be applied to emails that are not sent from one of the mail servers defined in the SPF record. If you use this dash sign, it means that the policy would fail for all emails that are not coming from the IP addresses that are defined behind this DNS record. So this is the recommended value. You can also, for testing, use the tilde sign. If you use the tilde sign instead of the dash sign, it means that emails will soft fail in case they were sent from an IP address that's not included in the DNS record. But that should not be used for production domains. For production domains, you should always use this dash symbol. Now let's see how it's actually configured for my domain. because you can see that my domain is not managed in Microsoft 365 Admin Center, but it's managed at Cloudflare. So I'm going to Cloudflare and I will scroll down, and here is the SPF record for my domain. The way how you define the name depends on the DNS provider. So for example, for Cloudflare, you use the @ symbol that defines that it's this DNS record is applied to the primary domain. Some providers just keep it blank. Some providers want you to define the full domain name. So it depends on the provider. But this policy should be applied to the primary domain, to the root domain that you use for your email service. In my case, it's this cswrld.com domain, because that's where my email is. And here's the content of the DNS records, which is exactly the same as Office 365 generated for me. But like I said, if you use or if you send emails from some other service or other IP addresses, you need to include those as well. And you can do that, for example, by adding a record. So if you add a record, it means that the SPF will also include all IP addresses that are behind your A records. That's typical for situations where you, for example, send emails from your web servers, because there is, for example, a contact form or registration form. So if the emails are actually going from your web servers, then you can simply specify it like this by simply adding an A record to the SPF record. Or if you want to include all IP addresses that are behind your MX record, you can do it like this. Or you can specify IP addresses manually. So you can, for instance, define IP addresses like this, IP4. So this is the way how you would define an IPv4 address. Or you can also define IPv6. Like this, for example. It's very important to not forget anything. All email servers or all IP addresses in general that are used for sending email outside of your organization should be included in the SPF record. Okay, I'm going to cancel this because the record is already created. So this was SPF. Now let's talk about DKIM. DKIM is used to sign headers of emails that are being sent from your organization. It's important to sign headers because it gives the mail server of the recipient details about that this email was actually sent from the mail server that's defined for the domain. DKIM is again defined by a DNS record or records that you create for your domain. It can be either a CNAME or a TXT record. Office 365 defines DKIM via CNAMEs, 2 CNAME records. And as you can see, those are generated here as well. So it's selector 1 domain key, selector 2 domain key, and the values. The difference between a CNAME and TXT is that CNAME, in my opinion, gives you more flexibility. Because technically, behind this CNAME record, so behind this value that you see here, there is the TXT record anyway, because the TXT record defines a public key for the private key that was used to sign the email header, so that the recipient's mail server can verify that it is actually coming from an authorized email server. If you use a CNAME record instead of the TXT record directly, it means that you can rotate the keys anytime you want and you don't have to change your DNS records. And that's a huge advantage in my opinion. So it's good that Office 365 defines DKIM records via CNAME records. Because if you have a need to rotate the DKIM for your domain, you don't have to do anything else. You just click the rotate button or execute it via PowerShell and Microsoft takes care of everything. Because this address is managed by Microsoft. And Microsoft on the background during the key rotation changes the TXT record that's behind this CNAME record. So there is no manual action needed when you are rotating the keys. If you specify DKIM directly via TXT record, it means that whenever you rotate DKIM, you need to change the TXT record as well for your domain, because otherwise it would not match and recipient mail servers would not be able to verify that it's coming from the mail server it is supposed to be coming from. The reason why most services define two DKIM records is redundancy and also the rotations, so that they can be sure that there is always at least one record that's working, that's in the final configuration. Because if you do the rotation, it takes some time, because it also needs to propagate the DNS changes on the background. But if you have two DKIM records, the other one should be working. Alright, let's take a look how to configure the records at your DNS provider. So I'll go back to Cloudflare and scroll down here. And here are the two CNAME records that I have created. These are the same records that I showed you previously in the Microsoft 365 admin portal. So you see selector 1, domain key, and here is the value. What is important here is that these values needs to be unique across the whole environment. So if you have multiple services that send emails from your domain, all of them need to have unique selectors. So for Microsoft, it's selector 1, selector 2. If you use some other service to send emails from your domain, you need to choose different selectors, because selectors can be anything. So for the other service, it can be selector 3 and selector 4, or S1 and S2, or similar. So it can be anything. The second part of the selector is always the same, it's defined. That's the way how DKIM works. So this underscore domain key actually says that it is a domain key for DKIM. But the first part can be anything. It just defines the selector. But it needs to be aligned with what your email provider defines. So you cannot choose anything on your own. You need to be aligned with the service that's sending the email. So if Microsoft says it needs to be selector 1 and selector 2, then it needs to be selector 1 and selector 2. But some other services generate different selectors, or some other services also allow you to choose your own selector names. So then you can put anything instead of selector 1 and selector 2, it can be then anything. Alright, so these are the two records. As you can see, here is the second record. It's the same, it just uses the selector 2 and also selector 2 here in the target name. So that's for DKIM. Last part of the DKIM setup is to go back to the security portal and to policies and rules, threat policies, email authentication settings, DKIM, and here you need to make sure that DKIM is actually enabled for the domain. So I open this domain and you see it's enabled for my domain. But make sure that when you set the CNAME records for DKIM, you need to make sure that it's actually signing outbound messages for you. Because just adding the record is not enough. You need to actually enable it, which instructs the mail server on the background to start signing the message headers. So you need to switch this to enabled. If you have not set the records yet, or if the records are not set correctly, Office 365 will notify you that the CNAME records are not configured and will not allow you to enable it. So you don't need to worry about it. You don't need to worry that that it's not configured properly, because Office 365 checks it on the background before it's actually enabled. So you can just go ahead and enable it, and if something is not right, Office 365 will tell you. Also, what you can see here is the Rotate DKIM Keys button. With this button, you can simply rotate the DKIM keys for this domain. Again, you don't need to worry about it because Office 365 uses the CNAME records, which means that it takes care of everything on the background automatically. You don't need to worry about setting the TXT records for your new DKIM keys or anything. Microsoft takes care of it on the background automatically as part of the key rotation process. So Microsoft changes the keys that are behind the CNAME records for you automatically. In general, there is usually no need to rotate keys manually, and it's just in case you suspect that there might be something wrong with the keys, they may have leaked or something, but in general it's not necessary to rotate the keys at all. You can also rotate the keys via PowerShell if you need to. When you are rotating it via PowerShell, you can also specify the key size, which is sometimes useful, because if you have an old tenant and if you have enabled DKIM years ago, you might be using the 1024 bits keys, so one kilobyte keys, and which is not considered secure enough any longer, and the automatic rotation does not take care of that. It will rotate the key with the same parameters. But via PowerShell, you can actually tell the service to use a different key size. So you can then choose 2 kilobits size of the keys. All right, that's all for DKIM. Last part of this email authentication is DMARC. DMARC itself doesn't define anything about the mail servers. It's not related to your mail servers, not related to your IP addresses, domains, or anything. It's just the policy for your domain. So DMARC defines the policy on what should happen with emails that fail SPF or DKIM authentication. It's again a DNS record. Let me close this quickly. It's a DNS record that you define for your domain. The record is always the same, so it's underscore DMARC, subdomain. The type of the record is TXT, always the same for all domains, all email providers, everything. And then you define the policy or you define the settings of DMARC. The way that DMARC works is that DMARC needs at least SPF or DKIM configured in order to work properly. At least one of it. It doesn't have to be both, but it needs to be at least one of it. Otherwise, DMARC will always fail. But if you have at least SPF or DKIM configured for your domain, then you can, and you should actually configure DMARC as well. If you have both DKIM and SPF configured, then both need to success in order for DMARC to be success. If you have configured both and one of it fails, so for example, DKIM is success, but SPF is fail, then it means that DMARC will be also fail, or the other way around. So if SPF is success and DKIM is fail, DMARC will fail. And what should happen with the emails that fail DMARC is defined in the DMARC record. This V is the same as for SPF, so it specifies the version, in this case of DMARC, and it always is DMARC 1. There is no other version, so it will be always the same. No matter what email provider you use, it will be always DMARC 1. Then we have the policy. The policy defines what should happen with emails that fail DMARC. The policy can be none, which is similar to not define DMARC at all. It doesn't instruct the email server what to do with it. The email server can do whatever it wants to do with it. It can be quarantine, which instructs the email server, the recipient email server, to put messages to quarantine if DMARC is fail. Or it can be reject. Reject simply says the recipient mail server to reject messages that fail DMARC. Reject is the policy that you see also here in my case, and that's the recommended configuration. Then PCT should be also always configured. PCT stands for percentage, and it defines the percentage of emails that this policy will apply to. So if it's 100, it's 100%. So all emails will have this or should have this policy applied to. It should always be 100% unless you do some testing. So if you do some testing or slow rollout of DMARC, you can start with something like 25%, then move on to 50, 75, 100, something like that. But it should be only temporarily, and it should be only for like testing or slow rollout of DMARC. For any production systems, it should be always 100%. So these three tags should be always configured: version, policy, percentage. Everything else is optional, and it's up to you if you configure it or not. So for instance, this SP tag defines policy for your subdomains. By default, all subdomains inherit the parent domain policy, which in this case is reject. But you may have a need to have a different policy for your subdomains, for example, so that parent domain will be reject and subdomains will be quarantine, for instance. But if you have the same policy for parent domain and subdomains, then you don't have to define it. So in my case, this configuration is actually redundant, but I put it here to show you the options. Then we have information about the reporting, which is this RUA and RUF. These two tags define the destination of DMARC reports. Mail servers, the recipient mail servers, should send DMARC reports. So if they process DMARC, if they evaluate DMARC, they should also send DMARC reports. And here you define the email addresses that you want to use for receiving the DMARC reports. There is one important note though: these reports are in XML format. It's pretty hard to read for users or your administrators. That's the reason why you should use some specific mailboxes related to services or products that can actually parse the DMARC reports for you instead of normal user mailboxes. And that's also the reason why I have this reportyuri.com email address here, because it's a service that parses the reports for me, and then I can just visualize it on charts or see it in the form of a table. In other words, it's user-friendly, and I can easily read the reports and focus on what's important, for instance, the failures. But if you just get it in the form of the raw XML file that probably will not give you much details or additional information. All right, but like I said, this is not important for the DMARC configuration. It's optional. The reports are useful though, because you can get it under your control. You see what's happening if someone is trying to spoof your emails or if there is a service that's misconfigured. But like I said, it's optional. Only 3 mandatory that should be always configured is the version, policy, and percentage. All right, that's all from my side for today. I hope you like it. Please share the video with your friends, with your colleagues, because I think this is very important, because email authentication improves the overall trust for email services in general. There is a lot of threats, there is a lot of malicious or suspicious emails, and the more authenticated emails we send and receive, the better overall protection for the email as a service in general will be. So please share it. Also, don't forget to follow my Cybersecurity World blog. Follow also my social profiles on LinkedIn and Twitter. And I also have a weekly newsletter where I summarize everything that happened in the past week in the form of a podcast. You can find the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. And that's really all from my side for today. Thanks again for watching, and see you next time.